The story begins in a small Mexican town near the American border. A young Mexican boy, Miguel, comes home to his mother Rosa, who loves him very much. She gets a call from her brother, Carlos, who urges her to take the boy and leave immediately because he got himself in trouble with the cartel and is now afraid for their lives. They leave in a hurry as the cartel's hitmen torture Carlos for information. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, in Arizona, Jim Hansen, a former Marine sniper, now a rancher, uses a rifle with a scope to shoot coyotes that try to eat his cows. He has a dog named Jackson as his best friend. Jim uses his radio to report illegal crossings near his ranch. He later finds a wounded Mexican man left behind by his group and calls for a medic on the radio. Jim has severe financial troubles as things on the ranch don't go as well as he expected, and he can't make payments on the land that is still owned by the bank. A banker comes down to the ranch and informs Jim in person that due to his increasing debts, the bank will have to sell his ranch in 90 days from now. Depressed about his situation, Jim goes to a bar and has too much to drink. A local bartender, a friend of the family, concerned about Jim, calls his daughter Sarah to come down and take care of her father. She brings Jim home, where the two reminisce about Jim's wife, who passed away a few years ago from cancer. Jim loved her very much. Overwhelmed with grief, he hasn't been himself ever since her demise. A few days later, Rosa and her son, accompanied by a guide, try to cross the border. The guide spots a cartel vehicle ahead and gets scared for his life, as his companions are wanted by the cartel. Despite Rosa's pleas for him to stay, he tells the two where they can find a small breach in the fence and cowardly leaves the two on their own. Rosa decides to risk it, so the two go to the fence and start looking for a way to get in. Miguel found the breach. However, the two were spotted by the cartel men in the car who start driving towards them. In a rush, Rosa injured her leg on the sharp metal wire from the fence. Meanwhile, Jim drives his car near the fence and is suddenly stopped by Miguel, who ran right in front of him. Jim calls the border patrol to have them send someone to pick up Rosa and the boy, but they can't spare anyone at the moment. Cartel's car approaches the fence, so Jim takes out his gun, expecting confrontation. Mauricio, the leader of the cartel gang, tries to intimidate Jim and demands that he release the woman and the child to him at once. However, being a tough veteran, Jim isn't scared of the Mexican criminals and refuses to let them take Rosa and Miguel. A violent shootout ensues, in which Jim fatally wounds one of Mauricio's men while they frantically shoot back using automatic weapons. Jim takes cover behind his truck and tells Rosa and the boy to get into the car while he engages the two remaining cartel men that took cover as well. Jim quickly gets in the truck and tries to drive away. However, Mauricio runs towards the car and manages to get in the back. Furthermore, one of the bullets shot by the other hitman earlier hit Rosa. Mauricio assaults Jim, so he quickly hits the brakes, throwing the assailant away, and drives away in the opposite direction. Turns out the man Jim shot earlier was Mauricio's brother. Enraged about what happened, Mauricio vows to avenge his brother. Sometime later, Jim stops the car to attend to Rosa, who is fatally wounded and isn't expected to survive. As she starts losing consciousness, she begs Jim to take care of her son, protect him from the cartel, and get him to her cousin in Chicago. Rosa passed away shortly afterwards. Border Patrol agents arrive and take Miguel in their custody. Jim's daughter Sarah works as a border control officer. She informs Jim that the boy seems resentful of him, blaming him for his mother's demise. Jim drives to the border station and gives a statement. Exhausted from the ordeal, he then falls asleep in his car and wakes up the next morning, observing the cartel men driving nearby in a black SUV. It turns out Mauricio and his gang can easily cross the border whenever they want, having corrupted Border Patrol officers on their payroll. Jim looks into the bag Rosa left earlier and, to his surprise, finds a substantial amount of money inside. It is revealed that this money was stolen from the cartel by Carlos earlier. The stolen money is the reason why the cartel hitmen chased Rosa and her son, as they consider them accessories to his crime. Feeling guilty about the promise he made to Rosa earlier, Jim goes back to the station to make sure Miguel is doing fine. Mauricio in the car observed his arrival. Jim asks a Border Patrol agent about the boy. Turns out Miguel is being deported as Mexican authorities claim he has a relative on the other side. Nevertheless, Jim asks the agent to have a talk with the boy. He figured out that Cartel is behind the deportation order and decides to help Miguel escape to his real relatives in Chicago. Jim and the boys sneak behind the Border Patrol agents in the building and get in his truck. Surprised by this turn of events, Mauricio and his men start chasing the two. Jim drives to his ranch and goes inside to pack his guns and ammunition. When he comes back to the car, the boy is gone. Miguel tries to escape on foot. Jim catches up with him and explains to the boy that only he can save him now from the cartel. So the two get in the car and drive to Chicago along the highway. The boy keeps his silence, still not trusting Jim. Mauricio arrives at the ranch, goes into Jim's house, and starts looking through his belongings. Among them, he finds the Silver Star Medal, a prestige military decoration awarded to members of the United States Armed Forces for valor in combat. Mauricio now realizes that Jim is no ordinary rancher, but a skilled combat-hardened soldier. Among other things, he also finds many final notice letters from the bank, indicating Jim has dire financial problems. Once Mauricio is done looking, his men pour gasoline on the floor and set the house on fire. Meanwhile, on the highway, Jim and Miguel stop to get something to eat. They later stop to get gas. Jim is happy to see that the boy likes his dog. While paying for gas, Jim buys an atlas with road maps for their long trip. The gas station clerk is surprised to see someone still using paper maps. Jim calls Sarah. She is understandably mad at him for taking the boy and orders him to bring him back. But Jim is adamant he won't give Miguel back to the authorities who want to hand him over to the cartel. At the cartel safe house, Mauricio's hackers use Jim's credit card information to pinpoint his position. They get notified that Jim used the card to pay for gas in New Mexico, so Mauricio and his crew depart to intercept them. In the car, Miguel suddenly starts speaking in English. He's still quite hostile towards Jim, not realizing he's trying to help. But bigger problems arise when the car's engine starts breaking down. Mauricio arrives at the gas station, trying to get information about Jim from the clerk. She isn't willing to give him the answers he wants, so Mauricio threatens the clerk and forces her to show him the security camera's footage from earlier. From the footage, he learns that Jim and the boy are driving northeast. The two stop to get the car fixed, but the repair shop is closed, so they have to come back the next day. Jim and Miguel go to a restaurant and have something to eat. While eating, they get to know each other better as the boy warms up towards Jim. Outside, Jim falls asleep in the car, so Miguel takes Jackson for a walk. In the morning, he comes back with the dog and some groceries. Jim has the car fixed and pays with his credit card for the repairs, after which the two continue their journey, going along Route 66 in Oklahoma. The hacker gets notified about the transaction and immediately informs Mauricio and his men about Jim's current location, which is only 20 miles from them. While driving, the two try to figure out the best route with their atlas. Miguel marks the destination, Chicago, on the map. Jim notices a police vehicle approaching him. The officer sounds the alarm, so Jim reluctantly pulls over. The policeman asks him about why he is driving with a boy who is clearly not his relative. Despite Jim's reasonably believable explanations, the policeman orders him outside and then into the back of the police cruiser because he wants to have a chat with a boy. But the policeman calls somebody on the phone instead. Jim gets suspicious about it because, judging by the conversation on the police radio, the officer never reported his whereabouts to his colleagues. He lets Jim out of the car, instructing him to wait in his car while he runs his information. Jim asks the policeman why he didn't speak to the boy like he said he would. It becomes apparent that the policeman is working for the cartel, so Jim confronts him. He points a gun at Jim, but as soon as he does that, Jackson attacks him, after which Jim and the policeman struggle over the gun. Eventually, Jim knocks the cop unconscious and then drives the car behind the hill nearby. He and the boy observe Mauricio and his men as they roughly question the policeman about what happened, after which they take his life. Mauricio found the atlas that Miguel lost earlier and took it with him. Sometime later, Jim and Miguel make it to a small town in Oklahoma. Jim tries to buy guns in a local gun shop. The store owner can only legally sell them to him after a few days' waiting period, so Jim begs for his help, assuring him he's not a criminal, but an honest veteran who fought for his country. Initially reluctant, the store owner agrees to sell them to Jim, on the condition that he will report them as stolen afterwards. Jim calls Sarah. She informs Jim that Mauricio is no ordinary thug, but a high-ranking figure in the cartel, and what's worse, Jim shot his brother earlier, so obviously Mauricio will hunt them down, no matter what it takes. Jim reluctantly agrees to stay in this town and wait for Sarah and her colleagues to arrive, after which he and the boy will surrender to them. Jim and Miguel decide to stay in a small motel, carefully hiding their car out of sight. Realizing that it was the credit card that allowed Mauricio and his men to pinpoint his position, Jim bribes the motel clerk to not register him and the boy. Despite the precaution, Mauricio and his men still manage to track them down to the motel and approach his room. Jim calls 911, informing the police about the three men with guns, after which Jim and the boy hastily leave the room through the window in the back. Cartel's hitmen with automatic guns knock down the door and chase Jim and Miguel as they run away from the motel into the woods. The two hide and stay quiet as Mauricio angrily yells at Jim to show himself. Police sirens approach the motel, so the three hitmen reluctantly leave the scene. Miguel goes to the car, while Jim goes back to get Jackson. However, before departing, Mauricio shoots the poor animal for barking at them. Heartbroken by the loss of his beloved pet, Jim buries the dog and has a falling out with Miguel after he realizes that Jim wanted to turn him over to the authorities instead of taking him to Chicago. Miguel runs away into the forest, saddened by what looks like a betrayal to him. Sarah arrives at the motel, looking for Jim and the boy. Meanwhile, Jim finds Miguel walking on the side of the road. The two resolve their differences and continue driving to Chicago. Miguel is saddened that he can't properly bury his mother, so they stop at the church and ask the priest to pray with them for the eternal soul of Rosa. Jim informs Sarah that despite the legal consequences of his actions, he is going to deliver Miguel to his relatives in Chicago. One of the cartel men looks through the atlas Miguel lost earlier and finds Chicago circled in red on one of the maps. So, Mauricio and his crew now know where Jim and Miguel are headed. Mauricio makes a call to his men in Chicago, telling them to ambush Jim on the highway. Meanwhile, Jim and Miguel stop at an abandoned farm where Jim practices his aim by shooting tin cans. Seeing Miguel's interest in the weapon, Jim teaches the boy how to properly fire the gun, giving him detailed explanations. Miguel shoots well, hitting the can from the first try. Empowered by the feeling of firing the gun, Miguel fantasizes about shooting the men that took the life of his mother. Jim discourages the boy from throwing his life away on revenge. That's not what Rosa would have wanted. Cartel's men start patrolling the highways leading to Chicago, looking for Jim and the boy. The two sit near the fire, talking about Jim's late wife and Miguel's mother. Even though Jim initially planned to use the money Rosa left him to pay his debts on the ranch, he realizes that this isn't right and gives the money to Miguel. However, he refuses to take it because it's the cartel's dirty money. So, in the most comical manner, the two start throwing the $100 bills into the fire one by one. Eventually, they burn it all. Jim and Miguel continue their journey to Chicago, that is now only 52 miles away. They are spotted by the cartel men on the overpass, and Jim spots them as well, so he takes the first exit out of the highway and heads in a different direction. Meanwhile, Mauricio is informed by a contact about Jim's current location and the direction in which he drove, so they catch up with him and accelerate to ram Jim's truck at the crossroads. Jim hits the brakes just in time, letting the black SUV go past them, after which he drives away downhill, while Mauricio's car gets stuck while turning. However, Jim's car's engine has overheated, and it starts to break down again. Realizing that driving away is not an option, Jim stops the car and gets his rifle, aiming it at the SUV. He shoots Mauricio's driver, and then destroys the tire, causing the SUV to crash and roll over many times. Having survived the brutal car crash, one of the henchmen opens fire at Jim, putting his truck on fire. Jim and the boy run away towards the farm as Mauricio and his men start chasing them. They hide in the barn where Jim uses a pitchfork as a base for his rifle, after which he aims it at the assailants and shoots one of the henchmen. Mauricio and the other henchmen frantically shoot back. Jim gives Miguel a gun and tells him to create a distraction in exactly 30 seconds from now, while he goes behind the barn to shoot the attackers. Miguel fires the gun in the barn, so the henchman moves to shoot back and gets gunned down by Jim, who was expecting his reaction. Meanwhile, Mauricio walks into the barn, so Miguel tries to hide in the hay, but he falls down and gets captured by Mauricio. He drags the boy to Jim, pointing a gun at his head, and orders Jim to drop his gun. Jim reluctantly complies. Mauricio mockingly puts a gun in the boy's hand, intending to shoot Jim with his arm, but Miguel quickly hits the reload button, dropping the magazine. So after just one shot that grazed Jim, Mauricio has to fight Jim in hand-to-hand combat. They go back and forth hitting each other. Miguel gets a gun and points it at Mauricio. Seeing this, he dares the boy to shoot him, making fun of his mother. Unwilling to let the boy end up just like the cartel men, Jim takes the gun and shoots Mauricio himself. Wounded Mauricio gives Jim the Silver Star medal he took from him earlier. Jim symbolically leaves one bullet in the gun and gives it to Mauricio, giving him a choice of either ending his own suffering or shooting Jim. As Jim and Miguel leave the farm, they hear a gunshot. Sometime later, they arrive in Chicago and find the house of Miguel's family. Before saying goodbye, Jim gives the boy his war medal as a gift. Encouraged by Jim, Miguel knocks on the door and has a heartbreaking reunion with his aunt. When he turns back, Jim has already gone. Jim gets on a bus, struggling to walk. It turns out the wound he received in the barn earlier is rather severe, and Jim is unlikely to survive. Nevertheless, as he starts losing consciousness, he smiles, happy that he has given an innocent child a chance for a normal life. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.